All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to get started with our final session of the day before a few brief closing remarks. So it's my pleasure to introduce our two facilitators for our action planning and next steps session. For those who were just on with me, they would have heard the bio for Stuart Reed, but I'm going to repeat that quickly. So Stuart has 25 years of experience in the not-for-profit sector. He is the executive director of the Grey Bruce Community Foundation and has been so since 2016 after 4 years at Brock University as the director of the Rodman Hall Art Center. He's an award-winning author and has a long list of essays and exhibition catalogs of which he is the author. And co-facilitating as well as Dr. Donald Cole. He is a professor at the University of Toronto Dalla Lana School of Public Health. He's also a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada in occupational and community medicine. And he is currently the consulting physician here at the Grey Bruce Health Unit. And I know that he spends his free time working on his son's farm in the southern Grey County area. So a very busy man. So we're very happy to have Dr. Cole join us as well as Stuart. So I will turn it over to the two of you to lead us through this session.
Thank you, Jason. I think when Donald and I had a chat, we flipped a coin, and I offered to give a little bit of a synopsis of the proceedings of the day, which I'll do now. It has been a very insightful day, and I go back to the goals of the conference to raise awareness, to foster dialogue, to spark innovative ideas, to put forward opportunities for collective impact. Strategies for moving forward, and I think we've seen that happen. I go back to the keynotes in the morning. First off was Blair Feltman, who talked about climate change and extreme weather risk, and some really interesting takeaways in terms of very practical solutions for mitigating flood risk, and that word that we heard it again and again through the day, adaptation, and that seems to be something that's a thematic that layers over everyone's presentation about what we're doing today. We're at a stage in climate change where it's not about aversion, but about facing the challenges ahead with a spirit of adaptation and resilience. And Dr. Feltman talked very pointedly about how climate change is posing problems. I wrote down things going wrong. So and floods and the way that floodwaters are affecting homeowners and property owners was something that seemed very pertinent to what he described. And then we moved from Dr. Feltman into Sonia Ski's presentation, which looked at climate change and raised issues of justice and social justice. And I thought that was a very interesting challenge to everyone that was listening about asking us to consider our own relationships and how we are operating with ourselves, conducting ourselves, and making choices. She also raised some startling numbers and graphs. She asked us if our hearts were falling. I think they were when we heard about 22,000 years of emissions, the equivalent of 22,000 years of emissions happening in the last 60 years. Those charts were quite startling. And that speed of change that she described is something that really lends urgency to the discussions today. It also kind of poked at us as Canadians. I know we get a bit chuffed with ourselves sometimes, maybe because of some of the neighbors that are nearby, but we can't do that in this instance. And hearing about Canada as responsible for 30% of the world's emissions of all time is quite a challenge to grapple with in terms of our responsibilities, not just locally, but globally. And I thought that was really interesting for Sonia to challenge us with. And she talked at great length about implications for public health and also mental wellness, which through our work at the Community Foundation and our Vital Signs work and our recent survey of charities and not-for-profits in the region, we know mental wellness, particularly during COVID, but also through climate grief, is something that we are having to deal with together and to look after one another through this situation. She also had a great idea, this ombudsman for the future. I think that was celebrated. There was a flurry of chat on the line, and I think we all understand that what we're doing now is going to have implications for many generations to come, and that mindfulness, that lens of the future on our local decisions is something that is really paramount moving ahead. So really interesting. And then next was Miles Richardson, who gave a very impassioned and heartfelt description of his engagement with major momentous times in terms of Indigenous knowledge and colonization on the West Coast, and his experiences were very well described, and I think he really reinforced some ideas about all of us are in this together, that there is a oneness in humanity and a oneness with creation that are going to be key to moving forward to any kind of solution. And his description of reconciliation of those modes of knowing, I think that is definitely something that we should all be mindful of. And I took the website down and signed up for the newsletter immediately, because it is something I acknowledge in my own reading and work, that the Indigenous stewardship of the land and their survival, as Miles talked about, is something that is going to be key to us maneuvering through the challenges that are ahead. And then we had a wonderful session, very interactive session led by Marilyn Struthers and John Anderson about the resilience film and some of the history of what's been happening locally, and very personal reflections about that ambivalence and that compulsion, where we sit, where we stand in engagement. And I know for all of us that were part of that, it's shifting quickly. And I thank John and Marilyn for talking about their journey to this point, and encouraging us to activate and to think about what we're doing ourselves. And then in the afternoon, I've been popping in and out of the wonderful breakout sessions. I led one about a Great Lakes One Water project the Foundation's engaged in. I heard a really wonderfully described session by Hiba Hussein on the Great Counties planning initiatives. There was a session, Thorsten Arnold talked about local food systems, and a beautiful evocation of the concept of resilient landscape and what that means in terms of our support for our food ecosystems and for our health and for climate change in Grey Bruce. I also dropped into sessions with Ronald McFarland, and Carol Mee, talking about how climate change is pushing us to action, and perhaps even some health benefits to responding to those challenges in terms of ways we're changing our diet, the ways we're looking for energy efficiency, the ways we're engaging with green space, all having wonderful repercussions. So, I mean, it's been a wonderful, lots of things to take in. If I have to say what resonates for me greatly, it was the opening this morning with Charlene Winger-Jones and her description of that oneness that I think ricocheted through the day for me. That we are not separate from nature. I loved her evocation about hugging a tree and about thinking about even our genetic relationship or our familial relationship with other organisms. I think grounds us and gives us wisdom and gives us empathy and compassion for moving ahead, not leaving anyone behind. Equity also seemed to be something that cropped up again and again during the day. Sonia Klinsky talked about relationships, but she really charged us to think about the most vulnerable peoples in these situations, and how climate change exacerbates disparity, and we have to be mindful of that and moving together, leaving no one behind. I was inspired last week when Community Foundations of Canada, our umbrella organization, released some vital signs reports on racial equity and put a lens to climate change using that. And I shared the link in the chat, but I urge you all to have a look at that. Coming through all that, I think I find a great deal of hope in meetings like this, and sharing, and I'm looking forward to hear what Donald thinks about this in terms of a summary of the wonderful impacts that we've shared together today.
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. That was a pretty great overview. I wanted to pick up on some of the work that, or some of what we put together collectively as part of the Liz Zetlin, Marilyn Struthers, and others climate action team, Gray Bruce session, where we were encouraged to say in 7 different areas, what have we done, or what do you feel most active in now? And I think that's a helpful lead into this session, which is, okay, there's been a lot of things shared. Look through the chat as well for that session. A lot of things shared about things that can be done, the local climate change action task force and various others. But I thought it was interesting that the most common response on the poll for those who shared was, in terms of taking in on the action wheel, was choosing to live green in my own way. And I think that's both individually, but also with neighbors and family and that sort of thing. I was interested that organizing and advocating for local change was also really high up there as the next most common thing. And only slightly after that, participating in political process and action. So this is a very kind of engaged group that we have here. So one of our thoughts in terms of what we might do with this session was to continue the chat piece of work. So if everybody could open that up. And the first was, okay, from what you've heard today, are there things that you think you're doing or that you've heard others doing that are going to really move us ahead, particularly in adaptation, but also, as many of you have pointed out, with components of mitigation? So that's the first thing. Have you got ideas from today of things you reinforce what you're already doing, or that you've seen others doing or heard about that you think would really help in Gray Bruce to address climate change? If people could start typing into the chat, that would be great, and then we can pick up on those and discuss them.
I think for me too, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people offer. But there was that what I take away from today too is that the macro versus micro, the local versus global, and that individual versus collective. And I feel that span of activity, it kind of introduces a little bit of paralysis. So yeah, how do we leave behind our apprehension and jump right in? And where do we go in such a broad spectrum of need and options and choices in terms of our activity?
That's great that people are starting to put in. So, and Finlay Seward said we need far more Indigenous voices and knowledge in our local media and information sharing. I think that's a really good piece. And I was very impressed today to hear both from our HIDA colleague this morning, Miles Richardson, but then also in the breakout to see the work that's being done by the alliance here, the Bagidawad Alliance, around climate change. Oh, lots of things here. So Barbara and Todd's, Barbara said important considerations of retention of natural infrastructure So that's a good part, and that's perhaps partly living green, but it's also when we talk about green infrastructure, that's something that municipalities, and I saw that there were some councillors and others part of the conference this morning. And then Gabrielle's shared a guide for municipalities to work with. This certainly links in with what Hiba Hussein was talking about, Grey County trying to take on, but they, as sort of a mid-tier, can do so much. Lee Gregg's emphasizing stuff we can control. That's a big question. I often think we can't really control with systems. I mean, take COVID-19. That's a consequence of reduction in biodiversity, climate change, a whole range of things that is kind of swept across us. So we have to kind of influence or nudge or take initiative, but I think we may have to give up on control as human beings. Lots about thinking collectively, and I know that's sometimes hard to do in this multi-tiered gallery Zoom world, but hopefully we've had people have had a certain feeling of that today. Anything you'd like to pick up on, Stuart?
Well, I'm interested in, Joachim Ostertag saying, think more collectively about responsibilities and action, personal change, engagement, and political involvement, challenging politicians consistently. And I go back to a project that I worked on for a number of years when I was at Brock. It was called Contemporary Art and Water, and it looked at how artists were making work that dealt with climate change and the water crisis. And we engaged a guest writer, Bob Sanford, who's the UNESCO World Chair on Water, and he wrote about what the thing in entirety. And one of his conclusions in his wonderful paper was that maybe our systems of government aren't conducive to tackling the long arcing questions that we're facing. We have these 4 years of people that are elected, and then the team changes. And how do we grapple with that when people are making decisions that are going to take the long road and some tough commitments to a longer arc than the window of election that we certainly have in place now? I've always that thought stayed with me and might ricochet off of what Joachim's saying there too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think this is really good in terms of reflection. The other thing we were supposed to do this particular session was actually talk about next steps. And this is a really good question because the kind of energy that went into organizing this conference, there's certainly, it's hard to maintain for those who kind of led the process for us. So I know that there's some interest in actually thinking about how we can continue to move these multiple agendas forward. Are there next steps that people feel quite strongly about? And maybe it's coordinating the many voices, as Odette speaking to now. Arlene's pointing out that going public with social action was 18% with this group. Is that, I'm not sure if that's high or low. Certainly we got the message from Miles this morning that in order to make change, the HIDA really took some major actions, socio-ecological actions perhaps, in being allies of their forests. So I'll pause for a moment. So where do people see the priorities in the next steps? Arlene, you've suggested one. Others' thoughts? Helen Doyle is raised appropriately given her background with the Ontario Public Health Association and as an environment committed person for many years with EcoHealth Ontario. She's talking about addressing it, climate change and health equity in all actions. Others' thoughts? I know it's hard. It's not like you can sit around a kitchen table, perhaps, and come up with a priority ranking, or some of you are talking about things individually you can do or we should do, writing letters. Ian Reich's comment, we've got to prioritize climate change with the same vigor as other public health emergencies. Really good point, Ian, and you may have more to say about that very shortly as you wrap up the day. But if we think of COVID-19, in fact, being linked up with the global environmental change we're all experiencing, that makes a lot of sense. Permaculture courses and holistic management. That's holistic management across sectors, Eric, or is that primarily agricultural or natural spaces management? Link climate change to things that are ongoing. Absolutely, mainstream it, not have it as an add-on. Figure out ways that climate change is a lens by which we look at things rather than yet another portfolio to pick up. Climate change is social justice. It would be good to hear thoughts on how that might increase in Grey Bruce. Any thoughts on that? Okay.
I think something that hasn't come up is that it's really an intergenerational challenge too, and making sure that in everything we do, we're engaging with young people and people that are inheriting the decisions we're making. I think would be great, and that the education, self-education that's engaged in learning a little bit more and thinking about solutions. I think that we really have to integrate an intergenerational lens on the way forward to make sure that it's got some traction and some we're passing the torch.
I think about that in the evening walks with my granddaughters through the woodlands and talking about the changes that are occurring to the woodland over the years as climate change is affecting us. Very good point. Okay, well, we seem to be good question. Why is change so hard? As one of the photos that was shown, how New York changed to a car-dominated culture of form of transportation within a decade or so. I think, yeah, why can't we make the kinds of changes the same we've seen in COVID? Various people remarked on, we've moved to not driving to all these meetings, but having our meetings more virtually. Yeah, ways of making changes more rapidly, keeping pace with climate change or even forging ahead of it. Stuart, I'm going to pass back to you for the last word, as we're going to have to move over to Ian Reich.
Well, the last word, oh my, I'd say the last word is one. And that's something I'm taking away from today, is about that feeling of unity, not just with everyone else on the call today and in pondering the dilemma, but about thinking about my place in the greater ecosystem and life on the planet, and trying not to, as that equity that extends to all the living creatures, and to try and be mindful and a good citizen and a good steward of all this abundance that was given. I think our opening remarks from was it Charlene? Yes, Charlene really talked about abundance and gratitude, and that's a great place to step forward with on any course of action, is thinking about how fortunate we are specifically to live in this beautiful part of the world, and all the riches that we have, and forests and waters and wonderful people that come together and care about one another. And that oneness is something that I think is going to shape the way forward, knowing that whatever we do as an individual has great ramifications for the collective and the larger systems around us too.
On that note, I will take over very briefly. I just have a few words of thanks before I turn it over to Ian for the closing. So I did want to thank the Grey Bruce Climate Change Working Group for helping organize this conference. My name has been kind of front and forefront, but only in print only. This has certainly been a team effort. So just to acknowledge Grey County, Bruce County, Public Health, Grey Sauble Conservation Area, the Grey Bruce Sustainability Network, Mawikwadong, Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, a variety of other organizational partners and community volunteers as well have made that group flourish over the last 18 months. On that note, I'll put a plug in for next steps is to consider joining this group. I'm going to have Laura put a contact email in the chat for Hiba Hussein. She is currently co-chairing that group with Public Health, and we would certainly welcome some new members to keep the momentum moving forward with that group. A special thanks to my two colleagues, Laura Needham and Brooke Tomset as well. They've been behind the scenes here at Public Health in our little control room, facilitating the chat, moderating sessions, making sure the IT is functioning smoothly. So thank you to them. Two final notes. The recordings will be, once downloaded, placed on the website where you are able to download the agendas. And we will circulate that link again to participants. So if you want to rewatch some sessions or view any of the sessions that you may have missed because you had to choose options, they will be posted there. I also mentioned in the chat that Rogers will be viewing the morning sessions on November 4th at 8 p.m. So you can watch it on your couch on the TV as well. And finally, we will be sending out an evaluation shortly at the conclusion of this conference. That will be emailed directly to anyone who registered. And please, we encourage you to take just 5 minutes to give us some feedback as we already begin to plan and think about what the next conference might entail. Feedback is always helpful in that component as well. On that note, I am going to turn it over to Ian Reich. Ian is a program manager here at the Grey Bruce Health Unit, as well as the co-chair with Francesca of the Healthy Communities Partnership, and he's going to offer a few closing remarks.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jason. I just really want to start by acknowledging the tremendous amount of work that you guys have done to organize this conference, and really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, not just yourselves, but all the presenters that are here today sharing their expertise with us. In the face of COVID, we could have very easily simply said, you know what, we're too busy and we're going to cancel this. But I made a comment in the chat box saying we need to make sure that climate change is responded to at the same level as things like COVID. So that is why I think us here at Public Health, along with the group that is here participating and the facilitators that are managing these sessions, are doing what they do, because it means so much, not just to us, but to our children. I remember classes participating in the very first Earth Day here in Ontario, and I was in grade school. And one of the questions I ask myself now is, why are the conversations so similar to what they were back then? And I've pondered those questions for quite a long time. And really, I think the answer is we tend to always ask ourselves, what more can we do as an organization to improve and move climate change forward? And I think our question should be is, why can we not work better together to make sure us as a collective can improve climate change as a whole? not just a whole province, not just as a city or a country, but as an entire world. I think if we can all sort of take home the idea that climate change isn't just climate change is our future, climate change is our life. And I think we just have to all keep that in mind when, we're challenged with recycling. We're challenged with sorting our garbage properly. We're challenged with the idea of moving to an electric vehicle. All of these are challenges for a reason. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be extremely hard to get to where we are needed to go to make sure that climate change can not just be controlled, but that it can be reversed, and that we can make sure that our future generations enjoy this world as much as we have. The words from this morning touched me greatly as well. I've had an opportunity to work directly within a First Nations community, and I've been able to be part of some very significant and powerful teachings. And really what hits home the most for me is the idea that we have to take care of our planet. Without it, we are absolutely nothing. So I think as a collective, we have the responsibility to move this initiative forward. And I do know us here at the Health Unit, we are dedicated to make sure that this is always going to be a priority for us, and that we will move this work forward. But I just want to, again, close by saying, Jason and team, thank you so much for doing this. And I'll let everyone know, they've all been working so hard with COVID that for them to be able to prioritize this work should say something to everyone. And I just want to reiterate that our team is definitely here to support this work moving forward with all system partners, regardless of where we're from. We all have the same end goal, and that is to improve the climate. So again, thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.